Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 172. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Texas, we have a very, very, very special guest, Kellen Cannon. Kellen, how are you?
I'm good, Joe.
This has been a long time coming. And before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about, the nerves, the excitement, and all of that. But before we talk about you at all, I just need to say that you are recording from a mobile home. It is a first for the podcast out of 170 plus episodes. So we just want to acknowledge that. And with that being said, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to people listening who might not know who you are.
Sure. So I'm Kellen. Those that might know me or know of me know I'm a physical therapist by trade, and I work in fitness. I absolutely love my job, so I lead with that because it's become a huge part of who I am. On top of that, I'm also from a really big family. I was raised by two parents also from very large families. My mom was one of 14, my dad was one of 5. And so that is also a piece of who I am. I am really into fitness, but I don't consider myself your standard fitness person. I'm honestly just still trying to figure this stuff out. And I work with a lot of people in physical therapy who are just trying to figure this stuff out, and a lot of my fitness clients as well. I don't consider myself by any means perfect. I have been told in the past I wear my heart on my sleeve. This doesn't mean everything to me, but to some people it does. I am a Scorpio, which I've been told are loyal and really struggle with betrayal, which I would say those two things are true of me. So there are some things that align with that zodiac stuff. So that's just a little bit about who I am. And yeah, we'll get into it more.
Yeah, well, that's a great intro. I'm a Taurus, probably the first time I've said that on the podcast. And I know that Tauruses are stubborn, and I am certainly stubborn, although I would reframe that as persistent, which I think is a good quality. And I think loyal is a great quality as well. I guess for more context for people listening, so the way you and I somehow in a roundabout way first got connected through social media was through your brother, Ryan, who is one of the best people I know. I hope he's listening to this. And you guys, you, Ryan, and from what I can tell on social media, your family are just such kind, bright, positive, loving people. And one of the other things people listening should know is that we've worked together for a while. You've been a client of mine. You've made such significant progress. And I would love to hear your take on it, but from back pain and maybe not a whole lot of strength training consistently to now a lot of consistent strength training, doing really well, training for the Philadelphia Marathon, crushing miles. And most recently, you've become a coach under the Project Endure umbrella, and you've done such a great job so far. And I'm sure we'll talk more about things like that. But for now, I would love to hear a little bit more about your fitness journey, and maybe that's where we start.
Yeah, definitely. So going back, I mentioned I'm from a very big family, and my parents were both from really big families. And one of the things that my parents instilled in us is to give us better opportunities than maybe that they had for themselves. My mom had my brother pretty young and unexpectedly. And I know things were a little bit rocky early on in my parents' marriage, and they stuck through it. And that has become more of a core understanding of how my parents kind of raised us. And, there were times that they were very hard on us. And I think there were parts of that were super helpful for me, and there were parts of that were hard for me. But it's made me who I am today. And a big part of that was fitness and sports. I grew up playing lacrosse and honestly all sports ever since I was little. Ryan was the same way. Lacrosse became a bigger part of what I was doing athletically, and then I ended up playing it in college. At the same time, my brother and I both worked on the beach patrol locally, which a lot of the athletes would do over the summers. I'm from Delaware, the Delaware Shore originally. And so that was also athletic and involved fitness in itself. So it kind of was like a big part of who I was from the beginning. And when I went into college lacrosse, I straight up sat the bench, but not just sat the bench at games. And I know I was a freshman, but like I was watching from the sidelines during plays at practice. It really frustrated me. It was really hard on me. And my brother was going through PT school at the time. And I was like, I need to prove myself, obviously. So I ended up in the gym working really hard. I would ask my brother for help. And fitness became a big part of who I was from there. And it's been a big part ever since. And I would say that was probably, about 10 years ago now. And it's been a journey. I think people see people in fitness and they're like, wow, they're like this unshakable force. They wake up every day and they just get after it and nothing can shake their mindset. And I try not to put stuff out there like that all the time because I think it's discouraging to people who are trying to figure out how to start. And I can tell you right now, it has been an up and down journey ever since I started lifting, working out, running 10 years ago. And I don't know, I can expand on that.
I would love to first highlight the fact that you are so real and authentic on social media, in real life, all of it. One of the things I appreciate is just how you break down for people who are following you on social media, like what's going through your mind and the struggles, the ups and the downs. And I think that's something that you don't see enough of on social media. And I'd love to dive into that a little bit. That mindset of, okay, wake up and it's a really hard day, or I don't want to do this, but I still get after it and it's not perfect. And all of that. Where did that mindset of persistence come from in you?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think there's been a lot of times where I didn't feel like I could be persistent. Now working in a field that involves pain and things like chronic pain, I work a lot with people who are struggling to use their bodies. And a big part of me learning myself has been being persistent. And that involves days that I feel good, days that I don't feel good. Um, and if I can do that, then other people can be encouraged that they can do that too. And that also speaks to the vulnerability that I definitely value because, like I led this podcast with, I am not perfect. I'm far from perfect. And I'm sure we'll talk about some things today to kind of dive deeper into all the ways that I truly didn't feel like I could ever end up here. And part of that is honestly sitting here talking to you right now, but also being a part of Project Endure as well as just proud of who I am and where I've gotten.
I would love to hear more about when you first came across Project Endure and what resonated and how it's impacted you. And then I would love to ask you a hard question after that.
Sure. So back to Ryan, my brother. We're super close, as you might have observed. He's a physical therapist too, so that's a big part of it. And he was a big part of why I became a physical therapist. And I've always looked up to him, and he knew I was having a really hard time during PT school. Um, and I want to say we've always been back and forth. And I want to say he sent me your podcast when it first started. And I want to say that was you might have started before I started listening, but I think I started listening in 2021. So
Mhm.
you can tell me, is that when you started?
Yes.
Okay. And so he sent me your podcast, and I remember him saying something along the lines of like, this is a guy you need to like watch what he's doing. And I don't know if it's because he felt encouraged by what you were doing or because he knew I was having a difficult time or he knew how challenging the field of physical therapy was. But he's like, you need to watch what this Joe guy is doing. And he sent me your podcast. So I listened to it. And I had just come through the first year of PT school. I want to say I was either in the third year, but I was in my first clinical. And I remember listening to the first episode of your podcast where you were talking about your situation. And you were talking a lot about PT school and how you were going through it during PT school. And there were so many things that resonated with me, like just in terms of how you were feeling. And it's hard being in a highly competitive grad school program and feeling like your whole existence is like falling apart. And it like genuinely it makes me emotional because it's a hard place to be. So I felt that like in your testimony and it was really powerful.
Oh,
And I've been listening on and off since.
oh, thank you. Well, the one episode you will not listen to, which we talked about, is probably this one. It is hard to go back and listen to your own voice and your own story, but I have no doubt that people listening to this will be impacted by what you have to say. And you know, I think we'll circle back to what you said about the first year of physical therapy school at some point, but I figured let me lead in with this big question. We'll see where it takes us. And if you've listened, then you know it's coming. But I ask everybody, when you look back at your life this far, Kellen, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not get to choose for yourself?
um and I honestly haven't really talked to a lot of people about this, so it's going to be hard to talk about. But I'm going to try my best. Um, are we able to pause during this?
Yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, I'm already I'm tearing up on my end and I don't know the whole thing and you take your time and you know, it's okay.
This is going to be hard.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You don't have to apologize and I think just to preface this that you know, the fact that it's emotional, it means something and I'm sure there are going to be people listening to this who get emotional with you not in a bad way, but because they don't feel so alone. So,
Okay, we're good. Let's start. Let's do it.
cool. You want me to ask the question again?
Um, yes.
Okay. So when you look back at your life to this point, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you didn't get to choose for yourself?
Yeah. So I mentioned my first year of PT school being really challenging before this. And there was a lot of moving parts that led me places where I did not want to go mentally. And I had never planned on going there mentally, but you end up in those places. And it was a really dark time for me. And some of it was associated with decisions that I was making that were leading to outcomes that I did not want. And I am learning to take accountability for those things. But no one ever asks to end up in the places that sometimes those autopilot things that we do in our life, our habits end up putting us in. Just to give a little bit of context. So I played lacrosse my whole life. I was an athlete. And so when I graduated undergrad, I actually ended up staying at Marymount for grad school. And I played lacrosse there. And I started off PT school like super high. You work your whole life to get there. You're among some of the most smart, competitive high achieving people. I was in a big class and I had a great GPA coming out of undergrad, great college career in lacrosse, and I just felt super alone. Part of that was no longer feeling like I had a team. You tie your identity to being an athlete for so long, and I loved my teammates. They at the time were some of the people that were closest to me. Um, and I've always been a people pleaser, so a big part of my identity was serving my teammates, being their team captain. And when I didn't have that anymore, that in itself was hard. Um, I had also ended myself up in a really terrible relationship that I never should have been in. Um, but people who are high achieving perfectionists try and fix people. Um, we stumble into situations where people look up to us, and they want to be around us. And, sometimes those people think it's also fun to hurt us. Um, and it was very short lived, but that relationship ended and I felt very vulnerable. He was someone who was very close to a lot of the only friends I had in the area. And I was extremely depressed. And a big part of it was not being able to escape this person because of how embedded he was in my community of who I thought were my people. Um, and so a lot of it, to say that I didn't take part in that relationship, it takes two to tango, would be a lie. And so if there's one thing I said to myself before coming on this podcast, it was I'm going to be fully transparent and honest because it only does others a disservice if I'm not. Um, and when you're in those sorts of relationships, you are also an active part in it. And that is something that I held a lot of guilt over, that I put myself in that situation. So all things aside, I felt very lonely. I remember many sleepless nights sitting in my room crying all night long because I felt like I had to wake up and go to class with all these people who were just crushing it. And I was not. And I thought I was going to enter PT school and crush it. And that wasn't the reality. And I went in and I bombed my first test. And that was the first concrete sign that I, for the first time in my life, was failing. And the teachers were seeing it. My classmates were seeing it. And it felt weird. And yeah, it was a dark place.
Thank you first for sharing. And I could see how our stories and our experiences in grad school, at least in the beginning, were similar in some ways. And obviously, that was so hard for you, and it's still hard to think about and to talk about. When you look back, is there anything you would have told Kellen from back then, before, during, or after that relationship, that would have helped her through that season of life?
Yeah. And yeah, I talk about being alone. And I just feel like when you're in that place, I'm someone who gets so invested in things to a point where it becomes a core part of who I am. And so that relationship, the further I got into it, the more I felt like I had to see it through until it became a positive in my life. And that was huge to me. And I feel like if someone could have stepped in and said, "You have already lost this battle, you need to walk away." Like that is what I needed to hear for myself is the longer you stay, the more you are going to lose. The longer you try, the more you are going to lose. and you have to walk away because you can't start winning until you walk away. And that was a huge pivoting point for me and a huge mindset shift, but I didn't see it at the time.
I want to share a quote that one of my clients had sent to me last week. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, but it hit me pretty hard. And so it is, I guess it's in relation to a student in college who's in their first semester, and their professor says to them, "You have a little bit of I want to save the world in you, and that's why you're here in college. I want you to know that it's okay if you only save one person, and it's okay if that person is you."
I love that. That's really powerful. And that is something that I've also been learning is when you take care of yourself, there is like tenfold that you can do with your life. And it's not selfish to do that.
Mm. Now, I would love to go back and dive into one more piece of this before we keep moving forward. You mentioned that there's accountability that you take, and it takes two to tango, and that you're not a perfect person, and none of us are. And if you're listening to this podcast and you think you're perfect, then reality check, you're not. What do you mean by that? And if you could go into even just a little bit more detail, I think there's probably a lot people can relate to.
Yeah. Obviously, like we as humans have all the power in the world to just walk away from something. And when I walked into that relationship, you feel in your gut when something's wrong and the behavior is not right. And there was a number of red flags. There was a number of behaviors that this person presented that I could have walked away. There were so many signs. But it's always the words that they're saying to kind of pull you back in. Even if you know better, in the moment it's really hard to not think that this person that you trust is being honest with you. And so there would be really hurtful things that would happen, and they'd be coupled with, you know, the opposite. And that was in my power to walk away at any moment. Of course, I was young and I'm learning still. Um, and there was something else I wanted to say to go off that, but I'm losing my train of thought.
Okay, if it comes back, it'll come back. But for now, I guess one more question and then we'll move forward. When you look back at that season in your life, the beginning of school, um, in what ways are you better for that?
I think I'm a ton more empathetic. When I started PT school that senior year of college, I thought that I was on top of the world and no one could touch me. And a part of that was why I ended up in the situation that I was. Um, and I become much more empathetic that anything can happen to any person. You can end up in these like relationships where you're looking from the outside at these people and you're like, why would she stay with him?
Mm,
And I've done that before. And when I got there, I was like, how did I get here? Um, and you're not immune to anything.
mm.
So it's always good to stay humble. Um, and that's definitely a big piece of it.
Yeah. I think that someone asked me this the other day, and I think that one of the best things about going through hard things is the fact that it does humble you, and it kind of brings you back to earth. It grounds you in a way. And I look at a lot of people, and again, in the world of physical therapy, rehab, and even fitness, you can see people with physical limitations, with physical struggles and battles. But the truth is, we're all walking around with something, and a lot of them you just can't see. And just that fact alone should be an encouragement to be more empathetic for everyone listening, because you just never know what someone else is going through. And we're all going through something.
100%.
And so to fast forward a bit, and I guess I'm jumping the gun because I don't know if your next answer is in the future or behind what we've already spoken about. But when you look at your life to this point, what is the hardest thing that you have done on purpose? And why did you do that thing?
So I feel like a lot of people talk about physical things that they've done on this podcast as being the hardest thing, and maybe I'm just not there yet. I'm obviously training for a marathon, but the more that I've thought about it and the more that I've gone through those training runs, like this is not the hardest thing that I've done. I've always been a person in all the seasons of my life that has used fitness to not detach, but just go to another place. And even when it's really hard, I've really been good at stuffing how I'm feeling down to continue that task. So I would almost say like that's not the hardest thing that
Mm.
I've ever chosen to do because that has been like my kryptonite my whole life. I'm like, this is where I go to hide almost. But I would say the hardest thing I've ever done is definitely make the decision that I was going to overcome my back pain.
Mm.
And nothing has been harder than that, and that was a conscious decision.
So you said that that was a conscious decision that you were going to overcome your back pain. Tell us why you phrased it that way and why you feel that it was a decision you made, not just something that happened.
I was living with it for a couple of years, thinking that not even thinking that something was gonna happen to make it better, but nothing did. Like, I just thought, "Oh, this is my life now," but it's also like it wasn't getting any better, it was getting worse, if anything. So, I knew I was not gonna have some, like, rescuer come and save me, I had to do it myself. And honestly, like, the pivotal moment for that, I wanna say it was 2 years ago, I went to Hawaii with my family because my brother lives over there, and we went on a family vacation, and I love running now, it's my favorite way to explore new places. I did not run once while in Hawaii. I tried to work out the gym once. Like, my legs were hurting me. I couldn't do a simple, like, shoulder press with light weight without my legs tingling. Um, we went on, like, one short hike. My back was killing me. And it got to a point where we had this minivan for our whole family, and my parents were like, "Oh," because I was complaining about my back hurting getting into this minivan. My parents were like, "Oh, we'll sit in the back," like, and I was like, "God, my parents, they have been offering me their beach chairs. They, like, went to the store and got me a beach chair. I can't sit on the beach." And I was like, "This sucks.
Mm.
Like, this actually sucks." And you get to a place where something sucks so much, it's like, I don't have a choice. I can do something about it, or I can just say this sucks for the rest of my life. And at the time, I was only 28 years old. And, you see what happens with pain that goes unmanaged and just bodies that go unmanaged in general when you're working in insurance physical therapy. Um, and it's scary. And I wish more people had the perspective that I have of people who go decades thinking that the answer to pain is to stop. And I was falling into that mindset having known better. And I was teaching fitness classes and I was working with high performers as a cash based PT in DC at the time. And my back was killing me. And I felt like such a fraud. Like, I felt like I was just gonna fake it till I made it until I don't know what was gonna happen. But I was like, I can't even put the plates on my patients' barbells anymore. Like, it's killing me. And so that was huge. All of that together, it forced me to change.
So once you decided to make that change, what did life look like? And you can go from a, very practical standpoint. I'm sure someone listening is in back pain at the moment. Or you can take it from more of a high level, psychological mindset standpoint, or both. But where did you go from there, from that decision?
I started to actually do the things that I was taught and that I knew. And those things, and it's so much harder to put them into practice when it's happening to your own body. Pain affects your mind. And I almost had to like really be aware of the thoughts that were passing through my mind because I think a lot of us end up in this autopilot just doing things. And this thought passed my mind that it's like when you aren't really doing anything intentionally challenging, but you are going through hard stuff, there is something wrong with that. And that's kind of where I felt I was. I was like, I wasn't intentionally putting my mind or putting myself physically in any direction, doing anything hard. And I was suffering from all these hard things. And I just had to be more intentional with my day to day. And a big part of that was I had fallen into a season of my life where I was punishing my body with exercise. It wasn't carrying positive connotations for me at that phase. Um, After PT school, I fell into this habit that that's what exercise was for. It's like I had been lazy and now I need to punish myself with a hard workout. Or like I felt like I was gaining weight and I needed to make myself smaller. And that became habitual to me. And I had to shift that mindset and be intentional about it every day, not just whenever I was feeling down, going and taking it out on my body. I removed running from what I was doing for a couple of weeks and let things settle down. And then I focused a lot on just managing pain. And there was something that I did that I wish more people did when they had pain. I wrote down what I was feeling symptoms wise every single day because what most people don't realize is you won't be fueled by the day-to-day outcomes. It's when you look back, weeks, months after doing consistent work that you see those true changes. And if you're looking for the day-to-day to inspire you, it's not going to. I was waking up every day and I felt like I couldn't touch my toes. And when you wake up every day, and I was using that to guide what I did next versus when I made that intention decision that I was not going to let this define me, I would wake up and my back would hurt and I would say, I'm going anyway. Um, and I scaled things back just to slowly scale things up. And I trusted the process. As cliche as it sounds, it works. And yeah. And then, I want to say that's when I reached out to you, actually. So you were also a big part of it. Coaches need coaches. So
Yeah. I,
that's super important.
I I have to say, I appreciate how much you have trusted the process. And I remember in the beginning, I gave you a couple of exercises that I think most people in pain would have probably not done, or at least like looked at me like I was crazy. And you had made an Instagram post, and I'm blanking on the exercise. Was it a kettlebell windmill potentially?
Mhm.
Right. And so you were in back pain doing kettlebell windmills and you stuck with it. Like, why even trust that in the first place?
There is always a solution to every problem. And so when you gave that to me, I said, Joe wants me to do this. And maybe I was like, you know what? I can't do it standing. I tried it. I did try it. And the best you can do is try and then modify. And that's what I do a lot with my patients and my clients is like, hey, just try it. Worst that can happen is it doesn't feel great. And it didn't feel great. So I did it in half kneeling. And it still hurt a little bit, but it was better and manageable. And it was at a level that I could work with. And eventually it stopped hurting.
Um,
So
when's the last time you had back pain?
it still gets stiff time to time, but I always tell people, I'm like, pain is a part of life. It's how your body talks to you. But I will say, I've been like traveling like crazy. Like, we're talking about hours in the car, like 10-hour days, like days in a row, or every other day, and then 10-hour flights. And when I went to Hawaii, when it was real bad, like that flight threw it off for like a good week. And I came back from Hawaii this past trip that we went on a couple weeks ago, and I had one of my friends who was like, "So how's your back?" I was like, "Now that you mention it, I literally haven't even thought about it.
Mm,
It's fine."
mm.
So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. And I think just to highlight a skill, because I would call it a skill, like the skill of do it anyway. It's the skill of getting up and recognizing, yeah, conditions aren't ideal. I'm tired. I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to do this, but I'll do it anyway because I said I would. And I think that is a skill because the more you flex that muscle, the stronger it gets. And it's not perfect for any of us, going back to the theme of we're not perfect, but it is important because over time, consistent effort compounds. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost, like you had said, right? We can't look to the day to day for inspiration because there's so much fluctuation and variation. And when you put in the work consistently, though, you will notice the progress. With all of that being said, when it comes to marathon training, you've been doing your thing, right? You've been practicing that skill, and I've watched you do the long runs after, not a lot of sleep, in the heat, after a lot of driving, and you get it done and you don't complain. And I appreciate that about you. How has that all been?
It's been good. It's been a journey. And I mean, I think I complain a little bit. I do complain a little bit sometimes. And I definitely am trying to be a little bit better about taking care of my body through this process. But I've really loved doing this because you have to take care of your body through this process. And um, something that I've really struggled with in the past is drinking.
Mm.
And that's been a huge part of this journey. And it's something that, when you're younger and your parents are like telling you your family has addiction issues and they try and steer you in certain directions. And that's something that I've struggled with in the past. Um, and when you're being intentional with what you're doing with your life, there are certain things that when you develop that self-awareness and you realize what those things are doing for you or what they're not doing for you, you're able to cut them out better because I have another thing that's filling that void. I'm someone who goes all in on things, and I made a joke to a coworker the other day. I said, I have life of the party tendencies, and they were laughing about it. But I do think it's kind of like this predisposition that it's like if I'm all in, I'm going all in. Like, and the same thing goes with marathon training. I've always been an enthusiast. I tend to be very passionate about things that I invest myself in. And so I'm just kind of letting this process guide me. My life is changing a little bit in a good way because of it. I don't know if marathons are going to be my sport, but I haven't even run one yet. So we'll see.
I would say I think most people get to the end of a marathon and say, I'm never doing that again. And then a small portion of those people have a second thought a few minutes later and think, oh no, I want to do another one. So we'll see which kind you are. And I would just love to highlight the idea of like characteristics and tendencies that we have, right? I would call myself an extremist. Like I go all in on things. I have an addictive tendency. And I gave up drinking over 11 years ago because I recognized that that's where I was channeling that trait. That trait was being channeled into going out and partying and drinking. And it wasn't the direction that I wanted for my life. And so I knew I wasn't going to change that part about me. I'm an extreme person. That's just who I am. So I needed to shift that and steer it in a more positive direction. And I just think it's an interesting exercise for anyone listening. What is that thing or what are those things that you might not love about yourself at this moment? What are those traits or characteristics that are not working for you? Maybe they're even working against you. And how could you not change them or get rid of them, but shift them and steer them in a more positive direction? And it's cool to know that you've done that. And on the topic of training and, preparing for the marathon, I would love to hear your thoughts on what the word endurance means to you with this being the Project Endure podcast.
Yeah. So obviously, marathon training's been an endurance sport. Um, Something that I really honestly, it just slipped my mind, which is crazy that I haven't touched on, is I'm a very spiritual person. And that has been a huge part of my story. And it was a huge part of me getting out of that terrible mental place that I was in. Um, and when you find that form of peace in your life, it does change you from the inside out. And I do see endurance as almost like this form of faith. And it's almost like faith as if it was personified against all demographics. I feel like, unfortunately, religion can be polarizing. Um, but faith is something we can all understand. And faith, in definition, It's the substance of things you hope for and the evidence of things not seen. And so endurance is similar to faith in that it's taking that next right action, even when you don't know if there's an ending, if you don't know if the ending's going to work out in your favor. But there's a bigger picture, and it's trusting that there is a bigger picture that your next best action will be a part of. And sometimes it's not all about you. And sometimes that thing that you're being a part of is going to better serve another person, whether it be in your profession, in your community, in your family. Um, and yeah, I think endurance is faith, and it's being a part of that picture and doing what's hard to create a positive ripple effect.
Nobody in 170 plus episodes has ever given a definition like that. And I really appreciate that. I agree. I'm kind of bummed I didn't think about that first. Now we have to credit that to you out on the internet. But endurance is faith personified, because if there wasn't a trust in the process, if there wasn't a faith, what would be the point, right? In order to endure, in order to keep going, you have to believe that something better, something bigger is on the other side if you just keep going. And that is so, so, so powerful. It also makes me think of the difference between endurance and exhaustion, because I think a lot of people run in circles their entire life and they feel like they're enduring, but really they're just exhausting themselves. But when you have something that you're moving toward, a purpose, a plan, a mission, impact, people, etc., it becomes something different. And you know, uh, in a marathon, there's a finish line, and that's really nice. Marathons are definitely an endurance sport, but in life, there really isn't a defined finish line, I guess, until we get to the end, which we don't know when that's coming. And that can make it hard, which is just another reason why faith is so important. Um, I'm curious, Kellen, this is a hard question, also coming from a person of faith. And so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. It's okay if you don't know, but how would you try to convince someone who doesn't currently believe that there is a reason to trust the process, or uh, there is a bigger picture? How would you try to help them understand why it's important to keep going anyway, to endure, to put one foot in front of the other in any area of their life?
Yeah, that's something that I have thought a lot about. I work with a lot of people, and I know how powerful my faith has been in my life. But I also know you can't force anyone to do anything or believe in anything, and people will have their preconceived notions. And I even had my preconceived notions before I felt my heart change in those moments that they did. A person really has to get to a point where they hate their situation enough to change the strategies of their heart. Um, and it's a process, and it's listening to the little cues. And sometimes it's hard to grapple with the idea of, if faith is so powerful, why do people struggle with horrible illnesses? And this is something I've been thinking a lot about, and this might go off on a tangent, but it's been really important to me. Um, about a year ago, we lost a member of our family to ALS, my cousin. And you think about the concept of endurance and enduring hard things, and you see these situations where endurance doesn't seem to end well for people when, terminal illnesses come into play. And it's like, what is the point? Like, what is the point? And that was something I struggled with for the past year. And that's kind of like the ups and downs of things. And I really sat with it for a few months, and it was really hard to watch this person who had been so athletic, who had children, who has a loving husband. It was really hard to see the ending the way that it was. And at the same time, I saw her husband, who cared for her until the very, very end. I saw her showing up for her daughter's softball games until the very, very end. I saw the love that her family showed for her until the very, very end. And her husband, I reached out to him and I said, what you did was so special, and I'm newly married, and if I can be half the spouse as you her, like, I have done the best thing in the world because what you did was so beautiful. And sometimes, like, it goes back to it's not all about you. And sometimes your story may not end the way that you wanted it to end, but the ripples that you create are so important for other people, and they make the world a better place, even if sometimes your story ends with you leaving this world, because eventually we're all going to leave this world. And there's people that'll argue none of this matters, we're all going to die, but I'd rather argue it all matters because we're going to die. You get one chance.
And
So that's kind of a circuitous way of answering that question, but yeah.
that is so powerful. And, I think it transitions well into the final question of the podcast. And before I ask you the final question, I also wanted to throw this quote in here at some point. So I'll do it now. It's from Chris Jammy, who said, "To share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength." And, I think that being vulnerable is one of the strongest things that we could do as humans. And it's one of the reasons that I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate your vulnerability and your strength. And so with that being said, for people listening who might be going through it, right? They are in a dark season. They're having a tough time. They might be questioning things. They're not sure how to keep moving forward or what to even think. If you have the chance right now to speak directly to those people, what would you say?
Yeah. And I feel very fortunate. This is why I love my job. I get to talk to a lot of people in these positions all day, every day. And people really open up to you when you're a physical therapist. I think it's such a blessing. I love it. And there's obviously I have these conversations one on one. And if there's one thing that I could draw attention to, you are never alone in what you're going through. I feel like pain can be extremely isolating. Illness can be extremely isolating. Loss can be so isolating. But that's just an illusion because there are so many people that are feeling that despair in the same way as you. And that's why I am so open now about things that I have been through, because I don't want anyone to ever feel like they have to go through it alone, because you don't, and you aren't alone. And there are people that have seen the other side of what you are going through. And that is like the one thing that I would draw attention to.
Yeah. And it's such an important point. It gets touched on almost every podcast, not by coincidence, but because it is so true. And if someone listening wants to reach out to you, Kellen, if something you said resonated, or they just want to say thank you, or they want to connect, or they want to work with you, where's the best place for people to do that?
Definitely Instagram. I do a lot of my communication through Instagram. It's the easiest way to access me. And please don't hesitate to reach out. I love when people reach out to me. I love talking to them. I love meeting like-minded people. So I'm always open to that.
Mm. So before we end, and I thank you again, I have to throw this in here. You have one of the coolest names I think that I know of, and that's because the OCD in my brain. I've never told you this, by the way. This is weird, but I figured we'd end on a funny note. It's like the alliteration, like Kellen Cannon, but it's not like they're not both C's or they're not both K's. Like something about that is just so cool. Like the double L in Kellen, the double N in Cannon. People listening are like, wow, I knew Joe was weird, but not this weird. So I admire the name, and I really, really appreciate you, all your hard work, the way you show up, and especially for this conversation. So thank you.
100%. And I've thought about that too. It's totally not weird.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Endure Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.